The school hallway was a cacophony, lockers banging like chaotic percussion, laughter as sharp as out-of-tune violins, sneakers dragging across the floor like a continuous, shapeless bass. For Samuel, every noise was physical aggression, a needle in his eardrums. He moved along the edges, a ghost in his own universe, his head slightly bowed, trying to find a harmony that did not exist there. On the main bulletin board, a bright, colorful poster announced the prom. Around it, the epicenter of the noise, the group of popular students led by Victor Alves laughed. Victor's father, Mr. Alves, a man whose power was visible in his expensive suit and imposing posture, stood next to the principal. His voice, though low, cut through the air. Think about the economy principle. A new sports complex, that's a legacy. That's victory. Victor's gaze met his father's, a mirror of approval. Then his gaze swept down the hallway and landed on Samuel. The joke that was born in that moment wasn't just cruel. It was the continuation of a legacy. Samuel's world wasn't empty. It was a cathedral of sound, a complex architecture that only he inhabited. The hum of the fluorescent lights was an insistent, unnerving B-flat. The dripping of a faucet in the bathroom was a staccato in F-sharp, a pattern he could follow to calm himself. He lived inside a constant symphony, and most of the time, it was painfully overwhelming. His only refuge, his only acoustically perfect space, was the old music room, sanctuary of worn wood that smelled of violin resin and the dust of decades of dreams. But the sanctuary was under threat. The music program, his only anchor amid the chaos of school, was hanging by a thread. The school board, chaired by Mr. Alves, wanted to cut all funding. The argument was fiscal efficiency. The real goal was to funnel the money into a new, modern arena for the basketball team, Victor's team. The guardian of that sanctuary was Maestro Antonio, a retired music teacher whom the school kept on as a volunteer for a pittance. "They see it as a luxury, Samuel," the maestro said one afternoon as he cleaned an old cello. "They look at a spreadsheet and see a number to be cut. They don't understand that for some of us, for you and me, this is air. It's the air we breathe." The maestro was one of the few humans who didn't try to force Samuel into his world, but instead asked permission to enter Samuel's. Their communication transcended words. The maestro would play a complex chord on the piano, and Samuel, with his eyes closed, would respond with a hand movement, indicating that the imaginary brass section should come in more softly. It was a dance of pure musical understanding, and that was where the maestro saw the tragedy unfolding. He saw Samuel's raw and extraordinary gift, a talent for conducting that was innate, almost supernatural, a genius trapped in a shell that the world had no patience to open. The cruelest irony was the maestro's memory. He remembered a boy 30 years ago, with nimble fingers and a fierce passion for the piano, a boy who cried when he won his first competition. That boy was Mr. Alves. The maestro remembered Mr. Alves' father, a man as hard as stone who one day stormed into the music room and said, "My son will not be one of those artists. He will be a businessman, a winner." The young Alves abandoned the piano the following week. Now, as if to exorcise the ghost of his own sacrificed passion, he was determined to destroy the place that represented it, ensuring that his own son, Victor, would be the winner his father had always wanted. Victor's contempt for music was a legacy, a wound passed down through silence and ambition. The joke was a masterpiece of strategic cruelty. Victor didn't just want to humiliate a classmate, he wanted to create a living symbol of the uselessness and ridiculousness of the music program, a final blow to influence the council vote. He cornered Samuel near the lockers, not with threats but with a venomous smile and manipulative logic. "Sam, listen," he said, placing a heavy arm on Samuel's shoulders, a gesture that made the boy cringe inwardly at the unwanted contact and the strong smell of deodorant. "We need your help. Isabella, her mother, Mrs. Montero, is on the board. She's the vote that decides whether the music room stays or goes. She's on the fence." Victor's friends nodded in agreement, their faces a study in fake seriousness. "If you, the biggest talent in the program, the music boy, asked her to the dance, and it would be a statement, it would show her how important this is. For music, you understand?" The lie was perfectly calibrated. It didn't appeal to Samuel's ego, but to his only loyalty, his only passion, saving the sanctuary. The task, to Samuel's literal mind, became a sacred mission. He didn't process the sarcasm, only the sequence of actions necessary to achieve the goal. Isabella, on the other hand, was more than just the prom queen. She was intelligent, observant, and deeply tired of the role that had been imposed on her. She knew about her mother's battle on the board. When Samuel approached her in the courtyard, stiff as a statue, offering her a single rose that the maestro had given him and a card that read for the music, she saw the whole picture. She saw the cell phones recording. She saw the malicious smiles of Victor and his group. She saw the humiliation being woven in real time. But she also saw the terrified sincerity in Samuel's eyes. And in an instant she made a decision. It wasn't out of pity. It was out of anger. Anger at Victor. Anger at the dirty game. Anger at her own position as a golden pawn. "Yes, Samuel," she said, her voice louder and clearer than expected, causing some of the giggles to cease. "I accept. For the music." Samuel's hope, however, was brutally murdered when the edited video spread, without her response, only with the caption, "Our music program," trying to justify its budget. The video was an atomic bomb. Mr. Alves, with masterful hypocrisy, presented it at an informal meeting with other board members. "Look," he said, his tone grave and concerned, "this isn't about cutting the arts. It's about responsibility. The program is becoming a refuge for isolation. We need to encourage integration, team spirit. Sports build character. This," he gestured to the phone, "this is just sad." The narrative was powerful. Samuel's humiliation became a political argument. The school was divided. At home, Samuel imploded. He refused to leave his room, to eat, to interact. His parents found him sitting in the dark, rocking gently, a human metronome marking the beat of an inaudible pain. The tension between Helena and Roberto became almost unbearable. "I'm going to talk to that boy's father," Roberto growled one night, his helplessness manifesting itself as anger. "Alves, you think he doesn't know about this? He probably orchestrated the whole thing," Helena replied, her voice choked with tears. "Making a scene will only put more spotlight on Samuel. They'll say we're making a fuss. We have to protect him, Roberto. With silence." "Silence? Helena, silence is killing our son." Isabella was also at war. At a tense dinner, she confronted her mother. "Did you see what they did? They're using a boy as a weapon to pressure you." Her mother, Mrs. Montero, a woman caught between her conscience and a web of political favors, sighed. "The world is more complicated, daughter. Mr. Alves is a very influential man. He financed half the council's campaign. So what? Are we going to let him destroy the program and a boy's reputation just because he's rich?" retorted Isabella. The turning point for her came when she overheard Victor on the phone with his father. "The humiliation worked," Victor said, but his voice lacked triumph. "Isabella's mother is wavering, but I think we've gone too far." His father's response was cold. "There's no such thing as too far in the pursuit of victory, Victor. It's a lesson you need to learn. Destroy your opponent's foundation, and the rest will crumble." Isabella felt a chill. That was a philosophy of life, a philosophy she refused to accept. She decided to take action. Samuel, driven by a desperation that overcame his paralysis, finally went to the music room. He found Maestro Antonio looking out the window, his silhouette bent by defeat. Samuel didn't show him the video. He showed him the notification from the school portal. Final vote on the arts program budget. Agenda, closure, date, Monday, 2 days after the dance. The dance was their last chance, the last note to be played before the final silence. The maestro looked at the yellowed sheet music, at the worn instruments, at the boy of immeasurable talent in front of him. A lifetime dedicated to beauty was about to be erased by calculating men, and a righteous fury, an ancient fury, began to burn in his veins. "They want to humiliate us to the end," said the maestro, his voice low but vibrating. "They think they've cornered us, but they've forgotten one thing, Samuel. They've forgotten the power of a crescendo. They've forgotten what happens when the silence finally explodes. The plan was born out of that fury. It would not be a defense, it would be an attack with the only weapon they possessed, beauty." Maestro Antonio took out his old address book, a worn leather booklet, and began to make calls. The sequence of phone calls was a symphony in itself. First, to a former student, the concertmaster of the city orchestra. "Anna, it's Antonio. I remember you when you were 7, crying because you couldn't get a harmonic right. Now I need your help. They're killing music here, and they're using a child to do it." Silence on the line. "Tell me where and when, maestro." Then to a red-bearded cellist known for his strong temperament. "David, they want to turn this room into a basketball storage room. And they humiliated a kid who has more music in one finger than Victor Alves has in his entire body." A bitter laugh on the other end. "That spoiled kid? Count me in. It will be a pleasure to play at the funeral of his ambitions." He didn't ask. He summoned them. He told the story not as bullying but as sacrilege. The orchestra began to form, not out of pity, but out of fierce loyalty to the music and the man who had taught them to love it. The secret rehearsals in the auditorium during the early hours of the morning were surreal. Professional musicians, accustomed to renowned conductors, looked skeptically at this quiet boy who made no eye contact. But then the baton rose, and the skepticism dissolved into pure amazement. Samuel conducted with an economy of gesture and a depth of feeling that were disconcerting. He didn't need words. He would tilt his head, and the string section knew he wanted a velvety sound. A quick glance at the percussion section, and the timpanist understood that the tension should build, but from below, like distant thunder. "He's not conducting us," the concertmaster Anna confessed to the maestro. "He's conducting the score itself, and we're just trying to follow him." Isabella's small victory was to obtain through emotional blackmail of the prom organizer, a student who needed help with calculus, a special 10-minute performance slot. The official excuse: a farewell tribute to the music program. The night of the dance arrived. The orchestra was gathered backstage in the gym, an impressive force of talent and solidarity. The instruments already in place on stage. Everything was ready for the musical ambush, and then the stage door was locked from the inside. 2 security guards hired especially for the evening blocked the way. The director appeared, his face pale, avoiding the maestro's gaze. "Antonio, I'm sorry. Mr. Alves." He invoked a civil liability clause in the event insurance. "Unauthorized. Outside participants on stage, it's too big a risk. The performance is canceled." The maestro argued, pleaded, his voice breaking with anger. But the decision had been made. The power of money and influence had once again silenced the music. Backstage, despair settled like a cold fog. The defeat was total. Samuel, seeing the closed door, cowered in a corner, his sensory world collapsing into white noise. Hope was dead. The silence backstage was more deafening than any symphony. It was the sound of defeat. Maestro Antonio, a man who had lived surrounded by harmony, sat on a piece of equipment, his face in his hands, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The professional musicians, frustrated and angry, began to put away their instruments. Samuel stood in a corner, rocking back and forth, completely catatonic, lost to the world. Roberta wanted to punch a wall, while Helena cried silently, hugging herself. It was Isabella who ignited the darkness, her face flushed with anger. She looked at the locked door and then at the stage visible through a crack. "They blocked the musicians," she said, her voice trembling but sharp as broken glass. "But they didn't block the music." Everyone turned to her. "What do you mean?" asked the maestro, his voice muffled. "They're out there," continued Isabella, gesturing toward the gym. "Mr. Alves's orchestra, the players from the team, the cheerleaders. But what about our orchestra? The students from the marching band are there. The girl who plays the flute and sits behind me in history class is there. The third-year guy who has a garage band is there. Anyone who has ever been touched by this music room is out there." The idea was absurd, impossible, and absolutely perfect. It was no longer about a flawless performance to impress a board. It was an act of rebellion. It was about fighting with the army you have, not the one you want. The spark became a flame. The maestro stood up, his eyes shining with a new light. "Roberto, Helena, I need all the parents' contact information you have. Anna," he turned to the Spalla, "I need an arrangement, something everyone knows, something simple but powerful." The deepest reflection, however, occurred in Samuel. From his fog of despair, he saw the spark of defiance in Isabella's eyes, the flame returning to the maestro's face. He saw his parents, no longer paralyzed but in action. He looked at his baton lying on the floor. He had seen it as a shield, a refuge. But now he saw what the maestro had always seen, a weapon. He didn't need an orchestra of polished professionals. He needed hearts that beat in the same rhythm of fury and hope. Slowly, he got up. He picked up his baton, and he walked over to the maestro, who was frantically scribbling notes on a napkin. Samuel touched his shoulder, and he pointed to the stage. He was ready to conduct his revolution. On stage, Victor, crowned prom king, basked in the glory. And now, he announced into the microphone, a smug smile on his face, a small and final tribute to our late music program, with the incomparable Samuel. The crowd laughed, a forced laugh. The curtains opened, and the laughter froze, turning into a collective gasp of confusion. The stage was not empty. It was filled with a disorganized and defiant collection of students, boys from the band in their crumpled uniforms, girls from the choir, a former student with an electric guitar, all with instruments in hand. And in the center on the podium stood Samuel. He looked small, but his presence filled the gym. He looked at Mr. Alves in the front row, a direct gaze that contained no fear but a cold challenge, and then he raised his baton. What followed was not classical music. It was an anthem. The unmistakable guitar riff from Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit echoed, but was soon accompanied by a trumpet section, a melancholic cello, and a chorus of voices. It was chaotic, a little out of tune, but it was visceral. It was honest. It was the sound of teenage angst and rage transformed into art. Samuel conducted like a man possessed, his baton cutting through the air, uniting that unlikely orchestra into a force of nature. The audience of teenagers, who had been waiting to mock, was swept away by the raw energy. They began to jump, to sing along. It was no longer a dance. It was a concert. It was a protest. At the end, after a deafening crescendo, silence fell for a second, and then the gym exploded in an ovation that seemed to shake the walls. Before the dust settled, Isabella took the stage, grabbed a microphone, and with a steady voice said, "What you just heard was an act of defiance, because Mr. Alves tried to silence us tonight by barring professional musicians from entering. He didn't want you to see the power that music has to bring us together." The gym turned to Mr. Alves, whose expression was a mask of fury and public humiliation. Isabella's mother in the audience stood up and applauded slowly and deliberately, looking directly at him. Other parents joined her. Monday's vote was lost to him. Victor looked at his father, not with admiration, but with a sudden, bitter clarity, seeing for the first time the fragility behind the tyranny. Samuel didn't wait for the applause. He left the baton on the podium and walked off the stage, not as a victim, but as a conductor who had just proven that music, real music, can never be silenced. Sometimes the most powerful symphony is not played by a perfect orchestra, but by a choir of broken hearts that refuses to stop singing. True art does not live in perfection. It lives in resistance. If this story inspired you, like, comment, and subscribe. Defend art in your community. Support teachers. And never ever let anyone tell you that your music, whatever it may be, doesn't deserve to be heard at full volume. The world needs it.